Sonic Adventure 2 is one of my favorite games of all time, but it wasn't always this way. Back when I was a kid, Sonic Adventure 2 was one of my favorite games of all time. But what? Oh, well, yeah, I liked the game when I was a kid, and I like the game now, but during my teenage years, I hated Sonic Adventure 2. I remember my attempted replay being punctuated by feelings of frustration and annoyance. I couldn't spin dash as easily as Sonic Adventure 1, I was constantly ramming into shit with the mechs, and the treasure hunting radar felt purposefully obtuse. I dropped that replay pretty early into it. Despite this, in 2020, after committing to giving it one last shot, I did another full 180 on Sonic Adventure 2, and it became one of my favorite Sonic games of all time. But what caused me to completely cross the spectrum of opinion on this game? Well, on the surface, Sonic Adventure 2 has a difficulty curve that's initially unwelcoming and even hostile to new players. But if you can manage to throw out your preconceptions, you'll find a purposefully and cleverly designed game that revolves around encouraging the player to achieve that one perfect run. To begin, I want to set definitions for some terminology important to the topic at hand. Those terms are difficulty curve, learning curve, skill floor, and skill ceiling. Difficulty curve is defined as how a game adjusts its difficulty over time, generally becoming more difficult as you progress. It's very important to note that difficulty curve and learning curve are two very different terms. While a difficulty curve is how the game itself responds to progression, the learning curve is the rate at which the players learn skills necessary to progress. Make a game where your difficulty curve outpaces the player's learning curve, and intentionally or not, you may create an experience that frustrates players unable to adapt. Now, skill floor and skill ceiling are two terms you've likely heard of if you're a fan of competitive shooters like Overwatch, Team Fortress 2, and Valorant. These three games are all very different, but what they have in common is that they're very difficult games built on top of a class system. A class system leads to every character having a different role and tools they use to fulfill that role. Since no character is created equal, they all have different skill ceilings, this being the absolute maximum value a player can provide by mastering that character. Meanwhile, the skill floor is the minimum amount of skill necessary to provide value to themselves or their team. Soldier, for example, has a low skill floor due to his higher than average health and powerful rocket launcher. But he also has a high skill ceiling due to having access to useful but complex tech like rocket jumping. On the contrary, Sniper is an example of a class with a high skill ceiling as well as a high skill floor. Sniping is hard, especially in a game with movement as crazy as this. But once you can reach that skill floor, you'll be chasing that skill ceiling for the rest of human history. There's a reason cheaters are always playing Sniper. He's the most powerful character in the game and will only get stronger as the player improves. But what does all this have to do with Sonic? Well, I think Sonic Adventure 2 is the Sniper of Sonic games. Initially, it asks a lot of the player, requiring that they understand 3 different gameplay styles as well as all of their idiosyncrasies, leading to a high skill floor as well as a high skill ceiling. Due to this high skill floor, Sonic Adventure 2 is initially unwelcoming to new players. Through some discussion with my friends, I've come to believe that this is what makes it such a divisive game. But how do you measure the skill floor of a single-player game? It's a little hard to define in a vacuum, so I'm going to compare with a Sonic game I'd call the Soldier of the Sonic series, a game with a high skill ceiling but a low skill floor, Sonic Adventure 1. I mentioned these discrepancies earlier, but every single one of Sonic's actions are on one button, so you can't spin dash repeatedly without activating the dinky somersault. The mechs, unlike Gamma, are completely incapable of making hard turns without kneecapping their own speed. And the treasure hunters can only detect one emerald at a time as opposed to SA1 Knuckles, who could hunt all 3 pieces simultaneously. Overall, Sonic Adventure 1 has a much lower skill floor due to its more lenient requirements for success, while Sonic Adventure 2 weakens a handful of the player's tools and asks much more of the player. And I don't think this was an accident. I think this was Sonic Team deliberately adding friction to the game in order to raise the skill floor and make moment-to-moment decision-making more impactful. This all becomes much more apparent not only from the reduction of gameplay styles from 6 to 3, but also due to a new system added to SA2, the ranking system. Technically, SA1 had a ranking system, but in practice, it just provided 3 missions per level for the player to complete. SA2 introduces the honest-to-goodness score-based ranking system where upon completion of a stage, you're ranked from E to A depending on how many points were earned. In comparison, Sonic Adventure 1's style of gameplay is much more free-form, as a result of there being no ranking system. Considering the game's most difficult challenges are just time trials, there's this focus on getting from point A to point B with not much care for what happens in between those points. Meaning, while there is some room for optimization, you won't need to work very hard to reach that initial skill floor. Sonic Adventure 2, on the other hand, shifts focus away from pure speed in favor of deliberate planning and execution. For example, the average point total required to obtain an A rank in Mission 1 of a Hero Story stage is about 17,500 points. And the time bonus is only worth a maximum of 10,000 points if you can complete the Herculean task of beating a stage in under a minute. The point bonus will then decay by 20 points for every second beyond that you spend in a stage. This means that if you're capable of gathering points at a rate faster than 1,200 points per minute, that time is better spent in the stage than going quickly. Which brings me back to those key differences of the playstyles between entries. What they all have in common is that they purposefully slow down the player, forcing them to think more carefully about individual action. All of Sonic and Shadow's moves being bound to one button can be frustrating at first, and while making design decisions like that does have a correlation with jail time, it means you can't just ignore your surroundings and repeatedly hammer the spin dash like Sonic Adventure 1. Here, you have to give careful consideration to keep an eye out for rails, trick spots, ring trails, and enemy chains to score big points. A bulk of these points will come from the bonuses granted after a homing attack chain. One cool piece of tech my buddy Mirai shared with me is that if you use the bounce bracelet, the game still considers Sonic airborne, so you can artificially extend combos to sneak in some more bonus points. As for the mechs, your greatest source of points come from completing long lock-on chains. These lock-ons are time limited and get broken when you take damage. The large number of enemies present in these stages and the lack of ground mobility means you often have to think about when a chain is worth firing off. Because shoot too early and you'll receive a reduced point bonus. Shoot too late and you'll risk getting hit in the middle of your volley, which will cause you to lose the bonus points entirely. It gives the mech stages this constant risk versus reward assessment for maximizing point gain. Finally, the treasure hunting stages. Ironically, these are more speed focused than Sonic and Shadow's levels. In addition to a time bonus at the end of the stage, the treasure hunters receive a mini time bonus per treasure collected. Now at first, the most jarring and obvious change may seem to be the Emerald Radar. It's been objectively nerfed compared to how it functioned in Sonic Adventure 1, but the largest difference actually lies in how the game delivers hints. SA1 allowed you to tap a T-Call orb, which would then guide you in the general direction of the Emerald piece, while SA2 replaces T-Call with these hint monitors that dole out cryptic passages relating to the piece's location. The interesting thing here is that T-Call's guidance is rather static in its value. It never increases or decreases in power based on the player's past experience. Meanwhile, the hint monitors gain value as the player gets more experienced at the game. Knowledge of the stages will lead to less hint monitors being required to pinpoint the location of a piece, allowing the player to gun it straight to its resting place and immediately begin hunting down the next one. While ultimately I do understand why these mechanical adjustments are frustrating to players of Sonic Adventure 1, these changes lend to the player having a much more focused and thoughtful relationship with the stage. In order to achieve an A rank, the player has to carefully plan how to engage with every facet of a level, and do it all quick enough to not dumpster their time bonus. Although, I will admit, the game does not do a good job of teaching this to the player, which is part of the reason the skill floor is so high. It doesn't really care about how a first-time player feels, especially because an initial playthrough will look something like this. Fuck! 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 Needless to say, ending every stage with an E rank doesn't feel good. In case you didn't know, this happens because on death, your points are completely reset to 0, meaning that if you die at any point beyond the start of a stage, an A rank is almost always impossible. But unless the player notices that their points are reset on death, they may just think they're missing some key detail about how to play well. Like, you could play really well up to the final checkpoint of a stage and lose it all because you got careless right before the goal ring and earn yourself a big fat E. You might have noticed earlier that the through line between every gameplay style is the importance of earning bonus points. Getting these bonuses and getting them frequently is the deciding factor of if you'll earn an A rank or not. And these bonuses functioning as feedback is a good thing. Landing huge bonuses is really satisfying. The only problem is that these bonuses are the sole form of mid-stage communication with the player. They're silent, small, and relegated to the very top left corner of the screen. It's really easy to just brush off and ignore. What I'm saying here is that Sonic Adventure 2 is a very arcadey game, and it wants its players to adopt a speedrunner-esque mindset of learning a route through a stage, considering the risk of scoring points versus saving time, and then perfecting that route. The problem being that the game provides no solid feedback on how you should achieve this. And while SA2 initially fails at this, it's important to note that overcorrecting and guiding the player too far in the other direction is also problematic. An example of this would be Doom Eternal. A frantic and intense FPS all about thinking on your feet and quick decision making. Now, I love this game to death, but it has a major problem that mostly affects first-time players. Before the player even gets a chance to engage with the new enemy, the game will, by default, present a tutorial on how to take advantage of a demon's weakness. This led to a lot of players believing Eternal's very freeform and creative combat to instead be a game of Simon Says, where each tutorial was the correct way of eradicating a demon. Since a lot of these methods are slow or situational, you could die as a result of overusing them, leading to players feeling like they're being punished for using what was presented as the right way to solve a problem. Now, with Eternal as too much and Adventure 2 as too little, what does hitting the sweet spot look like? Well, for this, I'm going to be looking to the indie space with Back when Pizza Tower first dropped, it only took a few short months for my friend group to transform into a gang of P-rank hunting menaces, and I was no exception. After completing the game normally, I went back and thought, well, I might as well try P-ranking the first level, and before I knew it, I was blatantly ignoring my final exams to try and score that damn last hit on Pizza! Pizza Tower is a 2D platformer based on the Wario Land series. The main objective is to collect all the toppins in a stage, destroy the John Pillar, and escape before Pizza Face shows up and kills you. Upon beating a stage, you'll be ranked from D to P based on your performance. In case you don't know, the requirements for a P rank are pretty strict. You'll need to collect all 5 toppins, the tower treasure, find all 3 secrets, and complete a second lap of the level's escape sequence. But it gets harder because that's not actually a P rank. The criteria I just listed will only net you an S rank. To go that one step further beyond, once you start a combo by defeating an enemy, you'll need to maintain that combo until you exit the stage on completion of your second lap. While these two games are very different, I'd say that the mindset they encourage and the height of their skill ceilings are very similar. So what made this comparably difficult challenge more widely appealing? Well, the game has a lot of small aspects that lend towards this philosophy of getting the perfect run. Having a combo meter constantly depleting provides the player with an immediate, tangible objective. It'll also constantly change descriptors and make sound effects as a combo is extended, making sure the player never forgets that they're playing well. Hell, it even rewards the player with a screen nuke if they manage to add 10 points to their combo. It takes the idea behind the bonus point awards and makes it a million times flashier, almost screaming in your face, "Keep that shit going!" Even if you don't choose to go for the P ranks or crazy full combos, the game still encourages casual players to strategize their runs. It does this by making its ranks represent significant stepping stones towards P ranks, with D through B being the learning ranks, A meaning the player most likely got almost every collectible on a stage, and S ranks meaning the player collected almost everything and did a second lap. In Sonic Adventure 2, since how you obtain your points is up to the player, every rank before A feels pretty worthless, and ultimately doesn't say anything representative of their play. E rank meaning, hey, you should probably try not dying next time, and C to B just meaning, you were close. Now, it may sound like I have a lot of issues with this game, and I do, but ultimately, if you can keep up with the game's initial hike in difficulty from beating the game to hunting down A ranks, you'll find out why it's one of my favorite Sonic games ever released. Eventually, the game does show off a very clever way of motivating the player to optimize. It just requires that you don't give up before beating the first mission of each stage. You see, there's a total of 5 missions per stage, each with their own A rank to earn. The first is always to complete the stage with as high of a score as possible, essentially encouraging the player to form a general route through the stage to maximize point gain. Mission 2 and 3 differ from the other missions by ranking the player solely on their completion time. Mission 2 asks the player to gather 100 rings, and Mission 3 is hunting down a lost Chow hidden somewhere in the stage. Mission 4 returns to having a point requirement, with the main constraint being a hard time limit, enforced by ending the stage automatically if the player doesn't complete it before time expires. This all comes together for Mission 5, Hard Mode. Here, a player's knowledge and execution will be put to the test, forcing them to play a much more difficult version of Mission 1. I adore this structure. Mission 1 helps the player get acquainted with the stage, Missions 2 and 3 encourage the player to really comb through the level and locate hidden routes or secrets, and Mission 4 and 5 force the player to really clean up their gameplay and master the stage. I think this mission structure is a really smart way to encourage playing SA2 like a speedrunner, where it's all about repetition and getting better one run at a time until you've eventually mastered it. It feels like such a natural evolution of the Genesis titles, where the complex movement mechanics gave the player a massive skill ceiling to reach for, allowing for a multitude of ways to grow and develop. And these missions push that up a notch by essentially giving the player a training regiment for getting better at the game. I really love this game, and you know, sometimes games are just complicated and unfriendly. But if you can conquer that initial difficulty curve, I think there's so much more depth to this game than most people give it credit for. Hell, even though it's the first true appearance of the score-based ranking system used in almost every Sonic game following it, it's a very strongly implemented system that I think the modern games in particular have failed to implement in a meaningful way. So if you've never played it, or have and didn't gel with it, I hope I've convinced you to give Sonic Adventure 2 a first or second chance. The PC port has some bugginess in cutscenes and a little bit of broken lighting, but is otherwise pretty solid, and the mod manager isn't very difficult to install if you want to smoothen out the experience. If you're looking for other games that require a mindset similar to SA2's, of course I'd recommend Pizza Tower, which has a slightly lower skill floor but similarly high skill ceiling, while actually giving the player some proper instruction. Jet Set Radio is honestly very similar to Sonic Adventure 2, where it'll seem clunky at first but feels amazing to get good at. And finally, Bomb Rush Cyberfunk, if you're looking for something like SA2 or Jet Set Radio, but way more chill of an experience. Hey, thanks for watching. I'm really proud of how this video came out, so thank you so much for sticking through the whole thing. Have a good night.